right, and let's spar. As you know, my guest can choose to go first or second. If you go first, you can speak your mind, speak your conscience. If you feel ambivalent, you can ask me to go first. But the first speaker will take 1 minute to speak their conscience. The second speaker will take 1 minute to refute the first speaker. And the third minute will be the sparring match where we can then question each other and interrupt each other.
Should military service be mandatory? Yes, we are. I think we are all obligated to defend our country in whatever way that we can. And this doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be armed and go out into fields of battle and shoot other people. But there are positions, for example, like decoding messages or other sorts of communication tasks. Military service can be achieved within your home country, even if your country is, I guess, at war with another. So I believe that there should be maybe a year or two should be paid. There should be opportunities for advancement and education. And yes, it should be mandatory.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. However, I disagree. I think no, military service doesn't need to be mandatory. We're not really a war-waging nation. We have never been invaded. We have a very capable big brother to the south of us, the United States, that can defend us if, in case there is any kind of global conflict and we need to have a strong military. No, I think our needs are met by volunteer military. There's enough people that are into that and they want to do that. And so why not let those people, those are the people that are going to be the most effective soldiers. So I think just to kind of it would be almost a waste of money to send a bunch of people to the military who are very unmotivated and or even opposed to being in the military. I mean, what are we doing spinning our wheels? To me, it seems like we're solving a problem that doesn't exist. So it also it's very time consuming. Like you're asking people to take 1 or 2 years out of their life when they could be progressing according to what their strengths are and what their dreams. And I think society would be better off if we all followed our dreams and not be told by the government that we must comply with the war machine.
Interesting you said that we're not, sort of a warmongering nation and we've never been invaded, but why don't you crack open your history books to something called the War of 1812, in which Canada was invaded by the Americans?
Okay, so because we were invaded in 1812, you want every Canadian to take out 2 years out of their life to join the military? It just seems a bit far-fetched. Let people be. It's not a time of war. If there was maybe a war happening, conscription, maybe I could consider it. But just as a general rule, no way.
And if we could talk about current political events in regards to unmotivated soldiers, I mean, you could ask those Russian families who have sent their men off to war if their men were motivated to go into war.
Yeah, well, that's a good example of having strong motivation, like if your country is invaded, but the lack of motivation came from the Russian side. And in fact, didn't Putin promise to mobilize hundreds of thousands of men for the war effort? And he did, except he mobilized young Russian men to leave Russia. And even my sister who lives in Vienna said you wouldn't believe the amount of young Russian men hanging around the city. And I think we're going to see a lot of half Russians in Europe being born because of this phenomenon. But no, I don't think. I think mothers would have a problem with this, and also there's a government trust issue, right? Because half the times when if the government, look at Putin. Would you want to raise your kid and for 18 years to invest in them and put all your hopes and dreams in a kid, and then have a guy like Putin saying, "Oh, he must march off to war with basically a paintball gun, march to like on a suicide mission"? I don't know. I think let the people who are, gun crazy and war happy, let them do it.
Agreed.
Okay. But if you had to do mandatory military service, Jason, what exactly would you volunteer to do in the military? How do you think you could be most useful?
Decoding messages, intercepting radio
A wind
transmissions.
talker. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So you'd like to sit in an office and basically play with digital spaces
Uh,
and
I'm afraid of guns. Like I once a long time ago, we went to play paintball, and my friends were all, well, it was work buddies, and they were all into it, and they were all gung ho like gun freaks, and I hid the entire time. I got shot once, and I hated it. I just hated it.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I did that paintball thing a couple times, and yeah, I felt like hunted. Anyway, yeah. So, but maybe like you said, and my other defense would have been, I think, in terms of being a service to to my society and my country, I'm better off alive than dead. Like a lifelong service to my country instead of me fighting in a field for a few minutes and then becoming cannon fodder. I don't know. I think I'm better off alive and let my career then speak for itself as I serve through debate coaching. I don't know now. I hope military people will not be offended by this. Next up. All right. I have a feeling I know which way you're going to go on this one. Should governments fund the arts?
Clearly, I have a vested interest. I should recuse myself from this because I have benefited from government funding, and certainly my clients have benefited from government funding. Should the government fund the arts? Absolutely, because that enables our country to have uh, displays of art and culture that we could not normally have, or to bring our arts and cultures to international audiences. The culture, yes, the government should fund the arts. It's also nice if the arts can fund themselves, but arts, fundamental to the arts is the creation of things that are much much bigger than we art is about creating things that are as beyond imagination or as expressive of imagination as possible, and money is only a constraint.
All right.
uh,
So you said fundamental to arts is the creation of things. So on that point, we can agree. But that's why I think governments cannot fund the arts. And if you think about authoritarian governments, when there's an authoritarian leader that takes over, usually the first thing they go after is the cultural, I guess, professionals, the people that are shaping the culture, the artists, because when you can control the artists, you control the message. And so, with every revolution, there has to be kind of a cultural component. So, art is powerful in the world, in a culture. And so, to let a government control it, to get involved with it, shape it. I mean, I think of the metaphor as a record label, an artist turning to a record label who has deep pockets and can fund the artist, but then all of a sudden feeling trapped and controlled and not being able to produce what you said is fundamental, their creation. And so I think artists will be limited if the government then creates a system where some artists get funded and some don't.
that is the actual system. Some artists get funded and some artists don't, and it could be argued that the government does have some control over the type of art that's being produced. But funding is not inherently control of the arts, at least not in Canada.
Yeah, but isn't the art world itself, like you said, kind of, aren't there like really rich artists and benefactors that could feasibly fund the people that are coming up in their genre? I think that the art itself will suffer if there's funding, because then it'll become a game of who can kind of secure the funding, who's good at filling out applications, and who's really I guess persistent, and not who's the best artist and who's the most creative.
Unfortunately, that what you're saying is true.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Wow. I can't believe I hit it on the nose there. All right. And the last one today. This is stems from something I brought up in debate class this week from a news report came out this week about how the UN had a summit, and they declared that half the world's population, 4.3 billion of us, has limited access to water, and 1/4 of the world's population relies on contaminated water. And so there is a water crisis looming in the world. And I don't know if you've ever seen any evidence of this in your travels, but I have in South America and Bolivia, where I saw water strikes and protests. But my people come from Egypt, right? And in Egypt, there's one river, the Nile, that runs down the middle of the country. And everything that's not along the banks of the Nile is like cartoon style, dusty desert. And the only green is along the banks of the Nile, and that's one river that runs through Egypt, a country of 160 million people. And that river doesn't only supply Egypt, it supplies the country before Egypt, the country after Egypt, it runs through all of Africa. So what happens in one country affects what happens in Egypt. And so we are experiencing a water crisis in this world, and some people say water is going to be the new gold, the new oil, and wars will be fought in the future about water. So with that as the premise, and as a water-rich nation, will Canada thrive in a global water crisis?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no because Canada has not been able to fully solve its water crises at home. And a lot of our native Aboriginal communities are experiencing water crisis. And we need to get our own house in order before we start bragging about how much we are thriving globally.
You have a full minute to make your case.
Once our problems at home have been solved, perhaps then maybe we could be considered thriving. But does thriving mean that we're not helping other nations who are experiencing water crises?
I think just as the law of supply and demand, if we have the supply and the world has the demand, we're going to thrive. It's going to create a new industry where we have the commodity, the thing that everybody wants. It's like oil-rich nations for many, many, many years. Countries that have natural resources of oil have been thriving, and they're the ones who can host the Olympics and have billionaires and set the terms and the price for fuel. That's the same thing that's going to happen with water. Water is going to be the new fuel, and we have all the fresh water. It's crazy, and to be honest, we have been thriving because we're living in a world where there is water insecurity, and half of us don't get enough water, and 1/4 of us don't get enough clean water, and so we don't feel any water crisis in Canada. None of us ever think about it. We sprinkle our lawns with water all summer long, and it's kind of an evidence that we're thriving and that this problem doesn't affect us at all.
When you say we, are you including any of our Aboriginal communities that have been suffering from poisoned water for
Yeah, but I
decades?
see that as a political issue. And so if water does become the new gold, and I think Canada will clean up its mess, and I don't think it's about presenting ourselves as a braggadocious nation or kind of trying to prove some kind of point to the world. It's just a matter of supply and demand, right? If the waters doesn't, if the what I think is going to happen is we're going to run into morality issues. Can we set the price? If some country cannot pay our price, are we going to then withhold something from them that they need for survival? So in that sense, we might run into some sticky points, but we're definitely in the driver's seat, which means we're thriving.
I feel that it is not something that we could brag about. I think water insecurity affects our entire planet. It's not, there's no winners or losers.
No, no, absolutely not. In fact, the thing that worries me about it is our dear neighbors to the south, to be honest, because they're the hotter neighbor, right? And already in the United States, from traveling around, they have Dust Bowl cities. Las Vegas is built in a desert below sea level. They have one dam. If something happens to that dam, millions upon millions of people will be affected. They have like my stepmother comes from Phoenix, Arizona, and Tempe, Arizona. These are dried up cities. And so what happens if United States starts looking at us sideways and says, they have the water. We need the water. Is it impossible? Is it a fantasy to think that the United States could roll up on Canada the way Russia rolled up on Ukraine? And it also seems like the countries that get invaded and annexed are always the ones that are oil rich. This is what happened in Iraq. Americans went there under the complete false pretense of weapons of mass destruction, and that they were involved in the 911 attacks, completely bogus. And what ended up happening is they killed 1 million innocent people, created a whole bunch of new terrorists, and then stole oil reserves from Iraq. And so that worries me, because is our friendship strong enough? Everybody seems to think United States and Canada are tied at the hip, but if water is the new oil and they need it, what does that mean about us? Okay,
Yep.
I guess I'm screaming into the wind here. All right, next up,